Hey everyone, you've got Sean Deveney here from Heavy.com and our NBA insider, Steve Bulpett, also from Heavy.com. We are talking about the Celtics and sort of a bummer of the last couple of days here, Steve, in terms of what's happened with Robert Williams, out with a meniscus tear. It'll need surgery to repair that. Probably going to keep him out. Those usually are at minimum 6 weeks. No definitive timeline on that for him. But you look at the last 2 years. I was looking at these numbers. Last 2 years, they are 50 and 24 when Robert Williams starts, and they're 33 and 41 when he does not. Kind of indicative of his development and his impact on that team. How do you see this hurting them going forward, and how do you see them maybe finding a way to deal with this?
Well, clearly, he has a huge impact on what they do, and it's not just the defense. I think he's got a huge impact offensively as well. There are teams you look at potential playoff opponents, and there are a couple teams I think they could probably beat, and then there are a few other ones you say I'm not really sure about that one. He's kind of like an X factor.
Yeah.
He just allows you to do so much more defensively. Their principles defensively don't change, but the quality of their defense certainly does. It's really a tough blow for the Celtics to take. Just a few games away from the start of the playoffs.
Yeah, so some of the teams that might be difficult matchups, who do you have in mind? When I look at, obviously, I think Philadelphia is the one that comes to mind because of Embiid. But it might be just as tough with a team like Milwaukee in terms of how you handle Giannis. How do you see some of those matchups out there?
Well, yeah, the Embiid thing is interesting because I think the last time they played him and had good success against the Sixers, the Celtics kind of played Al Horford a lot on Embiid, and allowing Rob Williams to be more of a roamer, to get into more of the switching thing, I think really has helped them a lot. So there's going to be a lot greater emphasis on Al Horford and his health and his just strength going forward. Of course, the age, I think he's 56 now. No, 35. That's going to be a big part of what they have to rely on. The Embiid thing will be huge. But again, I think they can make up for some of that with Al. But Milwaukee's another good point. You want to be able to show bodies to Giannis as he goes to the lane. And, everything is kind of predicated on stats now. And you look and say, okay, how many rebounds, how many points, how many blocks does Rob Williams have? But I tweeted out earlier this year that if the NBA ever came up with a stat for scares,
yeah,
he'd be huge in that because, you look at the times people drive on the Celtics and he alters shots. So that leads you to a roundabout way to answer your question of, you look at matchups and you think, okay, big versus big, but you also got to look at teams that have a lot of guys that get downhill, that drive well, and the effect that Rob Williams can have on them is important too. So you look at Philly would be important not just for the Embiid matchup, but also for James Harden, going to the hoop.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at what the options are available to Ime Udoka now, he's tried to be consistent, I think, in terms of how he handles his rotation. So, if you've had Horford out, if you've had Rob Williams out, you sort of go automatically to Grant Williams. That's sort of been his pattern there. Is that something that you could see them doing, or do they look at this and say, let's keep Grant off the bench and stick Daniel Tyson there and try to stick with the two bigs?
I think you might see some of the latter, but I think it's going to be based on matchups.
Yeah.
Particularly in a series, you get to really hone in on how you want to scheme against a certain team. And I think that's the way, you could see if they were to win the first two series, and, you could see different starting lineups all the way along versus each opponent.
Do you expect more Luke Cornett? Is that something that we might see? Ime doesn't seem to trust guys that he doesn't really trust, and he's not been somebody who's been in the rotation. But the necessity is the mother of invention sometimes.
I think you're going to see a lot more Daniel Tice.
Yeah.
The Tice was kind of used as like the third man in, but I think you're going to see Horford and Tice playing more extended minutes. I think that's probably the way that it looks like they'll go. But a guy like Cornett, he's going to come in. He's not going to give you the great defensive mobility, but he's not a stiff. He's a guy that, and you saw last night against Toronto. A guy like him, you need minutes to get into any kind of rhythm, to any kind of flow of the game. And I think you saw as the game went on, he was, the dexterity was coming back and things like that. And so he's a guy that can help them. And if you've made him ready to play, he can help you. By that, I mean that if he's going to be someone you're going to need in the playoffs, then you should be seeing him more over the last, 6 games they have left here.
Yeah.
Just to get him ready. I mean, you saw Aaron Nesmith last night getting a legitimate opportunity, something that some of us have been saying he should have been getting all along. And you saw him hit a big three at the end. You saw him making big plays on both ends of the floor. That's the kind of thing you need to look at for how you're going to handle the last part of this regular season if you're the Celtics, I believe.
Yeah, and Cornett gives you 6 fouls and the ability to knock down a shot here or there, so that's good. And Nesmith could offer some opportunities to play small ball in certain matchups. So, like you say, it'll depend on who they're playing and how the playoffs go. But you've got to make sure you've got a couple weeks here. You've got to make sure that if you're going to push one of these buttons, that they're not too rusty.
Sean, it's interesting. I don't know if did you get to watch last night's game, but no, sorry, you have a life. It was funny. Afterward, they were talking about how it was a valiant effort. They were so shorthanded without 4 starters and all that. But what struck me is that the Celtics had the game. They were ahead of this thing, and it went away from them because they went back to doing the things that had made them a bad team earlier in the year. As I'm very much a Marcus Smart person. I believe in what he does for a team. But, the dribble, driving into traffic, what did he have, 7 turnovers last night?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of things that they were doing earlier in the game. They, 30 some odd points in the first, 38 points in the first quarter. And with ball movement, cutting, and all those kind of things, the ball was popping around. And in the key possessions, he's driving into traffic, and instead of cycling the ball and getting the Raptors to move defensively. So Udoka didn't come out and say it specifically, but he said, "Hey, we had our chances, and it was execution that was the problem." And that's going to be an even greater import without Rob. Because one of the big things you miss without Rob Williams, and it only happens a few times a game, but there'll be points where guys drive to the basket, get into some trouble, and are able to lob the ball toward the hoop and know that wherever they put it within a 8 or whatever foot range, he's going to grab it and throw it down. And that's a nice little bailout tool to have that they will miss.
Yeah, and I think his passing as well. I mean, he's become a really good interior passer, and that's an underrated aspect of what he does. Would you your medical training is as extensive as mine, but with this meniscus injury, do you think there's a chance that he could come back during the postseason here?
Yes, I do. And unfortunately, I think I have more with my knees. I have more medical expertise than I want to have. Yeah, I look, there are a couple different ways they can go. There's a minor thing that they can do now that gets them back on the court sooner, and they'll deal with it more in the off season, and maybe he misses some time to start next season. And then there's the procedure that is more involved now that essentially ends his season. They've seen the MRIs and all that stuff, but anyway, what you got to know with knees is that you don't really know the full extent until you get in there. So, it's kind of like you're on a fast break once you open the knee and look, and you've got to execute properly. You've got to figure out what's the best decision, and kind of make it on the fly there to a degree. But they'll know what the options are, and I think they will have discussed them prior to going in. But that's as much as everybody wants to get the drop on this, you're not going to really know until the knee is opened.
Yeah, and it's a tricky situation for them to be in. Obviously, look, you'd like to get them back as quick as you can. You've got a real opportunity this year with the East being the way it is, and a little bit up for grabs, and them playing as well as they have. You've also got a 24-year-old who's under contract for the next 4 years, who has pretty long history of knee issues, and as well as the hip issue. He's had these health things before. If you rush him back, and people pay a lot more attention to this than they did in the past. But if you rush him back, then you're risking a longer term injury. And considering the investment that they have in him, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be tough for them to really justify him coming back unless they can be absolutely sure that he's not at a risk for re-injury there.
Yeah, but look, in terms of his injury history, there's a young guy that's very tall. That obviously his growth, timeline is different than a regular sized person. So his body's catching up with that spurt. I think, if he plays it properly and looks at how Robert Parrish, handled himself with pregame stretching and all those things, I think he can be a stronger player as he gets older, as he, learns how to treat his body, in game, pregame, off day, all those things. But yeah, we're talking meniscus here. We're not talking about an ACL or MCL or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically some cartilage here and some issues. And I think that there's room here to say, maybe you do something more minor now. And then once the season's over, you take the time to rest, perhaps go back in, do something more. If Rob Williams were to, get back and he's able to play maybe after the first round of the playoffs, and the Celtics were to go on a run, and he was able to, and what can he do? How physically capable of, or how close is he going to be to being Rob Williams? That's going to be the key issue for that time as well, another key issue. But if he were to miss the first few months of next season, yeah, sure, it probably could hurt the Celtics seeding in the 2023 playoffs, but not exactly a major problem if they can pull it off that way.
Yeah, and I think they were certainly aware that obviously given the history that Robert Williams was a potential injury problem down the stretch. I mean, he'd had the knee tendonitis in the left knee earlier this year, and then again a little later, and then this. And that's not to say it's all related, but if there's a little bit of instability there, that can leave you a little more vulnerable. When they were at the trade deadline, and we talked about this a lot before, they were obviously shopping Dennis Schroeder pretty hard, and from what I understand, they had some opportunities to make deals for other guards or other wing players that they passed up on. The one from Chicago for Troy Brown Jr., things like that. But they really wanted to make sure that they turned Dennis Schroeder into a big man, and because they really wanted to make sure they had that depth, which really wasn't there prior to that trade deadline.
Yeah, and I think that there probably are other bigs they could have gotten that maybe are more talented than Daniel Tice. Daniel Tice, for some reason, he is my younger sister's favorite player. And it was Parrish, then it was Tim Duncan, and how do you get to Daniel Tice? I don't know. We've considered an intervention in counseling, but with Tice, the important part there is, okay, maybe you can get a better player than Tice, but Tice may be more valuable to you because even though Udoka has switched up a little bit of the defensive scheme, Tice has got a familiarity with the guys and with what they do and what they can do that I think is huge. And you see it now. He was able to come in and he's playing good minutes. Did well last night, but is able to do a lot of the things defensively and slide into the proper spots. And there's not that kind of orientation period necessary. They were lucky really with both their pickups because Derek White has slid right in and, has elevated, not just, filled in and helped out. He's really elevated the operation when he's on the floor.
Is there a chance, and this is not something that the Celtics have really seemed very eager to do this year, but is there a chance they could still pursue, one of the guys who was let go before March 1st, who they could have on their roster? A couple names that popped up, or one would be Jordan Bell, who is an athletic sort of guy, a little like Rob, not near on the same level, but at least has some of the same tools. And Willie Cauley-Stein, who's really had a hard time sticking in the league. Could you see something to the Celtics doing something like that? Like I said, it hasn't seemed to be their style this year, but is that a move you could see Brad Stevens and Ime deciding to make?
I think it's going to really decide on what happens when they go inside Robert Williams' knee. I think that's going to be the huge thing but to your point, I would throw out what their history has been and how they've handled these situations because, even as opposed to several weeks ago, this team was looking like, hey, there's a chance to play for something really serious this year. And the fact that, if they see that opportunity still there, you've got to grab it while you can. It's not always there. It's not a birthright that they would be, a contender. So when you have an opening in your Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown window, you've got to grab it. So if they were to believe that someone out there can help them like that or can be that kind of guy, I'd see them doing it. I wouldn't see them relying on, well, this is how we've always done things. Well, yeah. You haven't ever gone from being 3 games under 500 to prior to last night's result, first in the East in 80 something days.
Yeah, it might not hurt to have a veteran backstop there. I think Cody Zeller would be an interesting name. He's had some injury issues. Not sure if he's 100% healthy yet. I think he was going to be out for 8 to 10 weeks back in late January, so it would be probably right around now that he'd be eligible to come back. But yeah, it's hard to say that there'd be anybody out there who could actually help you, but it certainly could give you a veteran presence at least.
Yeah, so they've got with Horford and Tice, you've got a pretty good veteran core right there for your bigs. And maybe you're going smaller a little bit more, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Your defense may struggle at the rim a little bit, but you've got, your perimeter defense is still, the huge part about what you do. with Marcus Smart and Derek White, and something that's kind of gotten underrated during his scoring flourishes is the defense, of Jason Tatum. That kind of stuff. Playing your defense, having it be strong on the perimeter, so it doesn't get to be a problem near the rim. That's great perimeter defense can be more important than bringing in another big person. You know what I'm saying? I could see them grabbing someone if they thought they needed an extra body, but I think what they've got, if they're able to keep that healthy, because you've had some knee soreness with Tatum and Brown the last couple of days, I think they'd be fine for the most part.
All right, not long to go before the playoffs start. We've got about 2 weeks. And Celtics with this monkey wrench obviously thrown into the plans, but some possible ways to handle it. And who knows, maybe we'll see Robert Williams back at some point during the playoffs. Thank you, Steve, for joining me here, and we will talk again about the NBA soon.